Hey everyone, Delve here. A few months back, I released a guide for the hand-to-hand skill in Oblivion, arguably the worst skill in the game. This video garnered some dislikes, and I figure it's because I used the 100% chameleon feature to make myself essentially invincible, so I thought I'd go over the hand-to-hand skill again, and this time also cover a variety of skills I haven't really covered thus far. Now, before I get started with the start of the run, I do want to say a few things about what this run won't include. First and foremost, no glitches. I've covered most of the best ones already. This includes things like item duping and infinite bound weapons and armors. Next, no invisibility, nor chameleon, not out of illusion, no potions, no powers. I've used invisibility extensively in the rest of my guides, so it's time to go without this time. Also, no mind control spells, nor summons. I've used both of these pretty extensively, and for that matter, no conjuration, illusion, or destruction spells at all. And no custom potions, spells, or enchantments. And while we are at it, no DLC items or powers either. I've covered things like Frostcrag Spire and the Shivering Isles extensively, and you can make the argument I'm too reliant on them. And finally, no Atronach Burst Sign, which is overall my most used burst sign. Also something I've been over-reliant on, I think, and not entirely necessary either. It's really not that strong, but it is convenient, but for this character, we won't really want it anyway. Onto the run. For our race, we'll want to go Nord. Nord is the one remaining good race that I haven't covered yet, and it's overall a decent race. It starts with a 50-point frost damage power, and this is fairly useful against some enemies, although less damage than you might think in the grand scheme of things. The race also comes with a 30-point shield power, which is really useful because it helps you reach the armor cap of 85, which we will absolutely want. For our star sign, we'll basically need the Serpent. It's a damage over time power, and it's crucial because it helps us get around hand-to-hand's extremely pathetic damage. Note that it does also drain our stamina when we do use it, so our hand-to-hand damage will go down a little bit, but I think we'll gain more than we lose. And for our class, we'll take a whole bunch of skills we haven't gotten around to using yet, and we'll go with Stealth Specialization, as well as Speed and Endurance for stats. Our skills will be Acrobatics, Alteration, Athletics, Hand-to-Hand, Mercantile, Sneak, and Speechcraft. I'll dive into most of these skills one by one as we go. We'll start with Hand-to-Hand. It's mostly self-explanatory. One nice thing about hand-to-hand is that it damages enemies' fatigue and can knock them down, but this does not at all disable enemies enough to prevent them from attacking you back, and that's really the main gimmick with the skill. Of course, your fists also weigh nothing and never break, which is actually kind of a benefit for max difficulty. Unfortunately, the damage is so pathetic and poor that it is outclassed by every other kind of damage in the game, literally all of them, arguably making it the worst way of dealing damage. You can fortify your fatigue with Restoration, or the Red Guard or Orc racials or something like that, or enchantments, to boost the damage by some, but it's not at all enough to make it good, so we're going to need some big tricks to make this work. The biggest and most obvious one is of course to never level up. Higher strength will increase your damage, but never enough to offset the increased health or stronger enemies. So that's a trick we have no way of not using, unless we're willing to use Chameleon or some other kind of crazy trick like that. One thing we can do at least is fortify the skill itself. The first way would be with the bands of Quang Lao, which can be stolen from a chest in the Imperial City Arena District. You can pick the lock on the chest quite easily, even with low lockpicking skill, as long as you know to look for when the pins move up slowly. Alternatively, you can pickpocket the key off one of the nearby brawlers, although to do that, you may want to follow one of them home or something like that, instead of trying to pickpocket them in broad daylight. Also, if you stand around watching them for a few minutes, you will gain 5 points to the hand-to-hand skill as well, which is a pretty unique bonus. And there's not really a whole bunch of places in the game where that kind of thing happens, so it's pretty cool. Next up is Stealth. Stealth is a skill I haven't really covered enough, and it's actually extremely broken, especially at low levels. It's also very easy to power level. Just go to the jail in the Imperial City, ask to see the prisoner, tell the guard to leave, and then go into Stealth and rapidly spam the spacebar key. You will quickly gain skill experience, and hit 100 Stealth in under 10 minutes. You could also probably do this with some other NPCs, such as the Skooma Addicts in Breville, although I haven't tested that. It's very lucky for us that this can be done, as we will absolutely need stealth to beat the game. And in some cases, it's actually just as good as being invisible or having 100% chameleon, as in you can literally sneak attack some enemies to death without them even realizing that they're even being attacked. There are some rules to it, and it is not foolproof, but quite powerful if you know the rules. I don't at all know how stealth works behind the scenes, but I can say for certain that the 3 key factors are light, enemy line of sight, and enemy detection. Light is the easiest one. Obviously, extremely dark areas are easier to sneak in. Ambient light seems to have an effect, including light sources in the environment, but it seemed to not matter in some scenarios. But on the main, the darker the better. Trying to sneak during the day, for example, is generally a bad idea, regardless of the enemy or their innate detection. But surprisingly, sneaking at nighttime is incredibly effective, with light levels apparently as low as some of the darkest dungeons, so that is pretty nice. Next is line of sight. As you can imagine, sneaking behind enemies is much more effective than sneaking in front of them. Although in adequate darkness, you can sometimes get away with it as long as you aren't attacking them, depending on your proximity and factors like movement, I guess. And then lastly, detection. Each enemy type has its own capacity to detect you, it seems like, with some enemies being able to very easily detect you no matter what, and others struggling to detect you at all. So this is another reason to stay low level, as enemies probably have worse detection skills, and some quests may prove difficult to complete with how good some enemies can be at detecting stealth, even at level 1, although I theorize it may also have to do with scripting, either with the NPCs themselves or how they're programmed to interact with the player, or with the scripting of the lighting in some dungeons, so don't expect sneaking to work all the time, but when it does work, it is pretty funny to watch. One location type that sneak is always going to be less effective is Oblivion gates. Again, I think it has something to do with how the lighting is calculated or something like that, but believe it or not, it is possible to sneak through Oblivion gates despite this, at least the very first one. Now you do have to get a little bit lucky, and to be extremely cognizant of which direction Daedra are facing. One last thing about sneaking is that casting spells does emit light, so don't do that right in front of enemies' faces. Whatever the case, be aware that you will not be able to use stealth for every quest in the game, like I said, but it can also be used to easily neutralize enemies that would otherwise be essentially impossible to beat with hand-to-hand, even with a lot of greater powers as assistance. Examples being most Daedra, ogres and trolls in the Fighters Guild questline, and even the vampire enemies in the quest for Azura's Star. These can easily be killed with stealth. Okay, so we have a tool to beat a lot of the game's enemies, but we'll still need tools to help us survive any fight without stealth, which will come up. So for this next section, we'll be talking about Alteration and armor more broadly. Being able to tank enemy attacks is extremely crucial, and it's essentially required to beat the game. It's the difference between getting two-shot by a stunted scamp and being able to punch them to death. But even so, some enemies like ogres will still deal too much damage for us to be able to survive. Any enemy with weapons, however, like bandits, even vampires, will be survivable in combat as long as you have maxed out armor. And of course, the armor cap is 85. Alteration itself is extremely easy to level, even without magic specialization, although it will still take you a while. The shield effect is also quite cheap, and even a level 1 or 2 character should easily be able to afford an expert level spell, such as 40% shield for 30 seconds, which can be bought in the Shadenhall Mages Guild. One thing to note about these Alteration spells is that the Serpent Burst Sign power will dispel your own spells off of you, so you'll want to use the power before giving yourself more defenses whenever possible. So, for example, a 40% shield spell coupled with the 30% from the Nord Racial, and we only need another 15% to hit the cap, which can be gained from armor. And in fact, there are many good armor sets and pieces available to level 1 characters. The most obvious one would be Umbra's Ebony armor, which I did already cover, and that can be obtained by luring Umbra up to the Imperial City. For more information about that, see the Blade Guide. Next up is the Chain set. This is a decent light armor set, and an early set of it can be found in a wide variety of places. A great example is the very first Fighters Guild quest in Shadenhall. If you let the NPC with the bow get killed, you can loot most of a full set off of her. Another option is the Thieves Guild questline. There's a quest to steal the bust of Lathasa Indurus in the Chainhall Chapel, and this bust is guarded by an NPC with most of a full set of chain armor. You can kill her and then loot her armor, although it will stop your progress in the Thieves Guild questline. You can also find a set on most dead guards, and there are a decent number of opportunities to get guards killed in the main quest, such as during the first Oblivion Gate. You can also find some dead Kvatch guards during the Siege of Castle Kvatch quest. You'll even be able to get a helmet this way, which is otherwise a fairly difficult thing to find. And you may be able to obtain this armor as well by murdering certain NPCs, such as O Timber of the Fighters Guild in Shadenhall, although you will get kicked out for that if you are a member. Speaking of the Fighters Guild questline also has some more decent items and armor in it, and this character is fortunately equipped to deal with that questline. Using Sneak, we can blast through troublesome enemies like skeletons, bandits, scamps, ogres, and even trolls. The quest you're looking to complete is Azani Blackheart, which is about halfway through, who always comes equipped with an almost full set of elven armor, which is a decent improvement over chain armor. Further in the questline, there are some other good items, such as a 7% shield ring in a chest somewhere, which I think is a guaranteed spawn, and you can also get a full set of Blackwood Company armor as well, which is as strong as Umbra's ebony armor, but for me it was no real improvement over elven armor, since I had a higher light armor skill. It's up to you between heavy and light armor for this character, but I liked the light armor here just so we moved around a little tiny bit quicker, and that really was nice for me. To talk briefly about the Fighters Guild questline, there are a few tricky quests worth talking about. The first is the Mystery at Harlan's Watch. This quest features trolls that will run from you after taking damage, making it tough to complete. Patience was the key here for me, and because the cave is divided into 2 zones, you may not want to use powers, just so trolls don't respawn in the other half of the cave, because if you use powers, you'll then have to wait 24 hours, and if you wait enough in one half of the cave, they will respawn in the other half of the cave, so you want to avoid that if you can. Also, trolls near the back entrance can run outside and get stuck, so do check around that back entrance if the quest isn't completing. Stealth is still really strong here, but it's not perfect. Now, information gathering is an example of a quest where stealth basically always fails. No clue whether or not it's due to enemy scripting or enemy detection or light or whatever. Fortunately, a character kitted out with 85% shield should be able to handle these enemies, since they have weapons, which are really weak, as long as you have enough healing potions to go along with it. For the final quest, Blackwood Company members can actually just be lured outside and killed by the guards, as necessary, although sneak worked surprisingly well for me as well here, at least against one of the Blackwood Company leaders. The Fighters Guild is probably the hardest major questline in the game, so I do like that I was able to beat it comfortably with this character, and it shows how strong a combination of sneak can be, with Alteration as a fallback, just in case enemies can't be stealth killed. Okay, next up I'll talk about Speechcraft. Speechcraft is both extremely fascinating and also kind of useless. With that being said, there are a decent number of quests which technically benefit from it, as NPC disposition obviously is a component of getting information out of certain NPCs, and you can get that for free via Speechcraft. On top of that, it can also affect prices in shops. Unfortunately, there are a lot of quests and interactions where it simply has no effect whatsoever, even when you think it probably could, which I found disappointing. Things like the highwaymen who sometimes try to shake you down on the road between cities. You'd think a skill like Speechcraft could maybe be used on them, but no such luck, they'll always shake you down. Same with the Dagon Shrine, maybe you could trick the NPC there with Speechcraft, but again, no such luck. Fallout New Vegas, this simply is not. Anyway, the skill itself revolves around a minigame with this wheel. The premise of the wheel is that it is divided into 4 quadrants, and each NPC is assigned a quadrant they really like, a quadrant they like, a quadrant they hate, and a quadrant they really hate. The trick is mostly to line up the biggest part of the wheel with the segment they really like, and then ideally line up the smallest part of the wheel with the part they really hate. It's actually weirdly hypnotic, and not at all a bad minigame, but it is tough to explain if you've never done it. Unfortunately, it's rendered largely useless because NPCs can just be bribed to gain disposition, so there's really no point in playing the minigame at all, assuming you have plenty of gold. It also is extremely slow to level up, arguably one of the worst skills to level, for seemingly no reason, but at least it can be used on merchants to give you a little bit cheaper prices. That's a great segue into Mercantile. This is another similar skill that's a huge pain to level up, but at least it's a lot more useful overall. How it works is that all or most merchants have a haggle button, and when you hit the button it brings up a slider bar. Even at a paltry 25 skill, it seems as though a lot of merchants can be brought to about the middle of the slider bar pretty easily, assuming high disposition. Merchants themselves also have a mercantile skill, which does affect where you can put the slider bar. If the slider bar is too high up, merchants will just reject the transaction and lose 1 disposition. The skill is fairly tedious to level up, however, but nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be. You gain skill XP every time you sell an item, and it counts each individual sale, so you'll want to sell a stack of items one at a time. That's where the tedium really comes in, but if you sell every item you find individually like that, the skill will increase at a decent enough rate. After having done the Fighters Guild questline and main quest, I ended up with a skill of around 65, which is alright I guess. Way better than Speechcraft, which I ended with a skill only in the 30s. The reason why Mercantile is so crucial for this character is of course so we can buy potions, as obviously we'll need those without alchemy. The NPC I recommend buying potions from is Angalmo and Coral. He not only has a low mercantile skill, but his selection of potions is also quite good as well. For gaining more gold, you can of course sell alchemy tools, but if you wait 3 days the cabinets will respawn. But I also use the Fort Farragut poisoned apples. There's a fort east out of Shadenhall, and if you go in the back entrance and pick the very hard lock on a barrel, you can find 10 poisoned apples which sell for a considerable amount. I actually regret this a tiny bit, as it is a bit cheesy, and it borders on an unintended exploit, and perhaps I could have done the Dark Brotherhood questline up until the point I meet LeChance at Fort Farragut. So maybe if I were to do this again, I'd do the first half of the Dark Brotherhood questline, but in any case, it's not a glitch or anything like that, so I guess it's fine. Luckily, you won't really need that much gold as a level 1 character, and I recommend just buying weak healing potions, which should be plentiful at any alchemy vendor. These are heavier than custom-made healing potions, but more than good enough to beat the entire game with, and since they recover your health infinitely, you can close and reopen the menu and instantly be able to drink another 4, so long as you don't get killed in one hit or run out of potions. So it can make you sort of invincible. The only other type of potion you'll need are strong spell absorption potions, which can also be bought at just about any alchemy vendor, including Angalmo and Coral. Not always necessary and very expensive, but in any scenario where stealth won't work and you are fighting spellcasters, these are necessary. A great example is the Dagon Shrine. Due to NPC scripting or perhaps enemy detection, your only real option is to run past all of the cultists, or I guess fight them, although you can infiltrate up until the point where you have to grab the Mysterium Xarxes. Another thing about Mercantile is that it makes it easier to get our hands on vendor-specific enchanted items, some of which are good or interesting. Obviously, being able to haggle down the price of a very expensive item by a percentage is a pretty cool feature. Most of these items are relatively tame in terms of what they can actually do for you, but most of them do also come with at least some decent armor value relative to a level 1 or 2 character, as well as enchantments. On top of that, having a mercantile of at least 50 causes some merchants who otherwise do not stock weapons or armor to have some of these as well, which is also quite interesting, and something you wouldn't have access to without the mercantile skill. We'll start with the weapons, although most of these are really more curiosities than they are useful, since keeping them charged at low level would be quite expensive, and it wouldn't be practical to charge them with soul gems. First is the Akaviri Sunderblade from Three Brothers Trade Goods in the Market District. This weapon disintegrates weapons and armor, so maybe it could be used to help power level armor. It also could be used against any enemy with a staff, as staves only have 100 durability, regardless of the level of the staff, so not at all useless even at level 1. Next up is the Akaviri Warblade from Jensen's Good as New Merchandise in the Market District. Damage health 15 points on strike is pretty nice, and the Drain Magicka and Fatigue aren't too bad either, so all things considered, this is maybe one of the best enchanted weapons in the game at level 1. Unfortunately, charging it would be really impractical with its 3000 charge total, but could maybe be used on some enemies such as Clanfear Runts when combined with other enchanted weapons. It's important to note that overall, damage enchantments at level 1 on weapons are quite poor, with most of them dealing between 5 or 10 damage per swing, so less than this particular weapon. Another option you have is a Sigilstone enchantment, as for whatever reason, a 15-point shock damage on strike enchantment is in the Sigilstone pool at level 1, so you can save and reload your game until you get that if you want. This Sigilstone enchantment has 80 uses per charge, and a full charge total of only about 2000, so it's much easier to make use of and keep it charged, relative to most enchanted melee weapons. And the thing is, the Staff Apotheosis also has a maximum charge of 3000, and deals 99 damage per cast, so most of these weapons just aren't efficient by comparison anyway, except that 15-point Sigilstone enchantment, and the reason that's so good is because you can farm an infinite number of them. One exception is the Bow of Infernal Frost, available from Raj Dar in the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary. Not only does this bow have 20 points of damage total, which is quite a lot, its maximum charge is only 200, meaning you could easily keep it charged with petty soul gems, filled with the souls of rats and mud crabs, and this could be used to kite annoying enemies like Clanfear Runts to death, assuming you bought enough petty soul gems and farmed enough petty souls. But the really interesting stuff is the armor, and you have plenty of good options. There's actually a lot of these, so I recommend looking at the UESP wiki article called Unique Items for more information. But I'll go over some of the ones that I think are the most interesting. I'm basically just going in the same order as these items appear in that list of items from the wiki. First up are the Quicksilver Boots. These are one of the items you'll need 50 mercantile skill to buy, and they can be bought from the Divine Elegance shop in the Imperial City. These have a quite good armor rating, and also provide 10 agility and 10 speed, with only a minor cost of draining the heavy armor and light armor skills by 5. Very cool boots, and I use these in a lot of places. Next up is the Birthright of Asterion. This light armor piece can be bought from the Gilded Carafe in the Imperial City, which is an alchemy shop. That's pretty cool. So you will need that 50 points of mercantile to buy this. Not only does this have a good armor rating, and is a piece of light armor, but also crucially comes with 50 points of fortified magicka, which is a pretty tremendous amount. That's equal to the Mage Burst Sign, or an endgame Sigil Stone enchantment. This enchantment allowed me to cast a Master level shield spell, the one that grants 50 points of shield for 60 seconds, when the second best shield spell you can buy only grants 40 points for 30 seconds. One nice thing about light armors is that they can be repaired cheaper than heavy armor pieces. Unfortunately, this armor piece is the exception, being so expensive that it is also quite difficult to keep repaired. So an armor skill of 50 would be nice if you want to make use of this exceptional piece of armor. For heavy armor, your best option for a chest piece is probably Dondarin's Juggernaut, which can be bought from the Nordwinds and Bruma. This offers slightly less defense than the Umbra's Ebony armor or Blackwood armor, but also fortifies strength and endurance by 10 points, so it is an interesting option. For gauntlets, the most interesting are the Hands of the Atronach, which are heavy gauntlets and can be bought at the Mystic Emporium in the Imperial City. These are endgame in terms of the armor they offer, although the enchantment is only okay, and not amazing in my opinion. Although I do think that all the enemies in the Dagon Shrine, for example, cast shock spells, so perhaps you could use these to stack shock resistance, alongside potions or spells of shock shield, for that particular quest. Other than that, I think for a hand-to-hand character, the bands of Quang Lao are still probably the best, as Jamora and Oblivion Gates, for example, can cast a wide variety of elemental spells. Next up is the Tower of the Nine, which can be bought at Stonewall Shields in the Imperial City. This is essentially an endgame quality shield, and has 15 points of armor, and also fortifies your block, heavy armor, and shield by 5 points. Unfortunately, hand-to-hand characters cannot block with shields, but the enchantment is still very good for most kinds of melee-oriented characters, as long as you can keep it repaired. Another extremely potent item is the Ring of Transmutation. This can be bought at a Warlock's Luck in Breville. This ring drains strength and endurance, but grants that incredible 50 points of magicka. So if you want to cast spells, this ring is an extremely good option for just about any character, and I'd say one of the best rings in the game, basically. And lastly, helmets, and there's 3 pretty good ones. The first is the Helm of Ferocity, which can be bought from the blacksmith in Skingrad. This has a whopping 7 base armor, and fortifies all 3 melee damage skills, but also drains your spellcasting stats. And lastly, Fin Gleam. This cannot be bought at a merchant. Instead, it is found underwater, near an island off the coast of Anvil, about right here on the map. You'll probably want a Night Eye and water-breathing potion for this. Luckily, both can be easily obtained from Angalmo and Coral, and probably other alchemy vendors as well. This helmet has Detect Life, Night Eye and water breathing, and decent armor for a light helm, with the only downside being that Night Eye effect kind of gets old after a while and hurts my eyes. It is also very cheap to repair, as well. And lastly, we have the Helm of Orain Bearclaw, which can be obtained at the very end of the Fighters Guild questline. Not really worth it at all for that much work, but it does have a good armor rating and also fortifies agility and endurance by 10 points, which is kinda nice. One last skill to cover is Acrobatics. Acrobatics affects your jump height, which has some uses for sure in various quests, jumping to areas you otherwise would not be able to access. An interesting example is using it to help scale high mountains, although not really all that useful. Supposedly, it can even also be used to jump over the gates of the Arcane University, enabling you to gain access to spellmaking and the vendors there, although I haven't tested that myself. And in the Thieves Guild questline, there's a pair of boots that fortifies it by 50 points. The main downside is that it is kind of slow to level for what it is, even with stealth specialization, but it is actually a surprisingly useful skill. But for our character, the biggest thing about it is the dodge roll. Once you have 50 acrobatics, holding the block button while jumping will cause your character to roll forward really quickly, which is a faster way to move around than running. This is pretty cool in some scenarios, and very helpful to beat some endgame quests without invisibility, at least for a hand-to-hand based character like this one. Which brings me to the end of the game, specifically the Great Gate and Paradise. I was able to get through the first segment of the Great Gate by simply sneaking past the enemies. The issue I ran into was a Clanfear on the bridge, who seemed to have a really good detection. But sneaking through the entire Great Gate may be possible if you took a route that specifically avoided the Clanfear, I think, such as through the towers on the other side. Once I had been detected, however, shield spells, strong spell absorption potions, and dodge rolling got me all the way to the top of the Great Gate. I needed around 4 spell absorption potions total, and this is including the fact I know exactly where to go, so do keep that in mind that if you don't really know the Great Gate super well, it could be a little bit trickier, and you may need more. 100 spell absorption with 2 potions. I also included the Atronach Stone Power, which also grants another 30% spell absorption, but you can't have this power and the paralysis burst sign power at the same time, so keep that in mind. Before I talk about Paradise, I may as well talk about vampirism in Oblivion. It can be obtained at any vampire dungeon, such as the Bloodcrust Caverns near Skingrad, as just an example. Each attack has a chance to give you the porphyric hemophilia disease, and if you wait 3 days and then sleep, you'll be transformed into a vampire. It also won't level you up, so if you want to stay level 2, you can be a vampire just fine. From there, you can wait 24 hours to progress your vampirism and gain all of the benefits, although you may need to fast travel or go between areas to progress all the way to max vampirism. If you stay in the same cell or area that's divided by loading screens, you may not be able to advance vampirism past like one extra stage or something like that. And vampirism does have some interesting benefits, including a wide variety of attribute and skill bonuses, all of which are quite nice. And several greater powers as well, including a charm, silence, and invisibility power. It also comes with a bonus 20% resistance to normal weapons, which means any enemy attacking you with an unenchanted weapon is going to do less damage. Although it does not affect the damage from unarmed monsters, such as ogres and Daedra, who are the real threat, so not so good really. And it also comes with immunity to paralysis and disease, neither of which are particularly interesting, but not useless either. Unfortunately, it does come with some pretty catastrophic downsides. Weakness to fire is really bad, and makes weak fire spells from enemies like scamps extremely dangerous. But it's by far their smallest problem. The bigger problem is sunlight. Being unable to be in the sunlight is basically intolerable, and makes fast traveling significantly more difficult, as wherever you travel needs a nearby cave for you to wait in, otherwise the sun kills you very rapidly, and you can't even wait in most people's houses, as that's considered trespassing. Now you can temporarily reduce sun damage by feeding on a sleeping person, but it removes the vampire bonuses, at which point, why even bother? On top of that, waiting at all will once again advance your vampirism, so it is a huge pain. Even doing something as simple as going to a vendor is a massive problem, except for vendors in guild halls and so forth. And to top it all off, the bonuses that vampirism provides you don't even really make the difference between a weak and a strong character, in my opinion, although they are good. So it's really more of a gimmick than a useful tool, even if things like invisibility powers are also quite strong. What it really needs is an overhaul so that maybe an enchanted item prevents you from taking sun damage, or something to that effect. But it did prove useful in Paradise, which is the end of the game and where we are headed to next. First off, the sun never sets in Paradise, but also there is no sun damage either, which is kind of nice. Secondly, the Clanfear runts are quite dangerous. So to complete the quests in the first segment, you want to follow the river, both to the door out, and then to Anaxi's lair if you take that quest. Once you are done with the first area, you can absolutely sneak through all the caves, although Clanfear runt detection is pretty strong. Alternatively, there are of course ways to kill them with enchanted weapons, as I already discussed in the weapons segment. Before fighting Mankar Cameron, I do recommend killing his 2 children, and the Vampire Silence power is a very good way to do this, as they won't be able to conjure their weapons or cast their powerful spells at you. You can also break Ruma's staff using the Akaviri Sunderblade, forcing both of them into using their fists, although you can probably use healing or spell absorption potions to neutralize the damage that way as well. And then afterwards, you can wait 24 hours to refresh the vampire power, and you should have bought yourself enough time before Mankar Cameron's children respawn. As for Mankar Cameron himself, trying to silence him with the vampire power reveals how buggy he really is, as it seemed not to work completely, with no real explanation as to why. Instead, he seemed to always have 1 or 2 spells available no matter what I did, and the silence spell in theory should ignore spell absorption and reflection, at least according to the wiki, and I think sometimes silence works. I have no clue what's really going on here, as he'd somehow summon a Dremora or cast an absorb health spell or something annoying like that. Eventually the spells he rolled seemed to do nothing, and I was able to stack my damage powers onto him and beat him to death, healing with potions of course along the way. Not the most elegant way to kill Cameron, but a way that did ultimately work, much to my incredible surprise, and I was pretty pleased with it overall. And that's Oblivion at max difficulty without glitches, custom spells or enchantments, and no invisibility or mind control, as well as detailed info about hand-to-hand, sneak, alteration, mercantile, acrobatics, and vampirism, and how they can help you beat the game at max difficulty. Lastly, as usual, I'd like to give a special thanks to Akis Herseg, Schneller Herring, and the Old Knight. All of these guys taught me about Oblivion, especially the Old Knight. And then of course also the UESP and fandom wikis, which are indispensable resources that I use constantly while playing this game. So thanks to all of those people, and thank you for watching.